Bezos Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Sanhedrin Daf Chaf, number 20. And we are holding on Daf Yomi Beis. And by towards the middle of the page, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. So it's going to move because it's pretty much one theme. We learned before that there was a machlokes in the Gemara and between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Again, Shaul HaMelech committed two of his daughters to be married to David HaMelech because of a extraordinary feat that he did. One of them was, obviously you remember, killing Goliath, and the other one was killing 100 Plishtim and bringing their foreskins. Did David HaMelech marry both of them? Rabbi Yossi said yes. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha said no. And so the Gemara is up to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. He only married Michal. Okay, so he didn't marry the other daughter of Shaul HaMelech, which is Meirav. Okay, so the Gemara asks a question. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, Hoksivis Chameshes b'nei Michal bas Shaul. It says the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Shaul, who was married to Adriel. Now that's what the pasuk says, and that's how somehow Rabbi Yossi learned that he actually married Meirav. But point is, the pasuk is not explained because these children, Michal did not marry this person Adriel. He married this person called Palti. So then how do you square off that these were her children, which she had with Adriel? So the Gemara is going to say a fascinating thing. Really, she didn't have these children. She didn't have any children. Or maybe she didn't have these children. But Amalacha Rabbi Yeshua, this teaches, the Tanakh is teaching you a very important concept. Amalacha Rabbi Yeshua said, Michal Yolda, was Michal the mother of these children? Valoi Meirav Yolda. Meirav, her sister, was the one that gave birth to these children. Apparently, maybe her sister died young, and Michal raised these children. Meirav Yolda, uMichal Gidla. Meirav gave birth to these children, and Michal raised the children. Lefichach Nikru al Shma. That's why they're called Michal's children, even though she's not their biological mother. This teaches you an important teaching. Whoever raises an orphan in his house, the Torah considers it as if you're the father. Very important point. So therefore, that's one of the lessons you learn from the 5 sons of Michal. Rab Chanina says you learn this idea at another place in Tanakh, and it's important to be a foster parent. But Yulad ben Lenomi. After Ruth gave birth, so Naomi was the one, the grandmother was sort of raising the child. And everybody was saying, oh, a child was born for Naomi. She was an old lady. Did Naomi give birth to this child? Rus gave birth to the child. Ella Rus Yalda v'Naomi Gidla. Lefichach Nikra al Shma. Rus gave birth to the child, Naomi raised the child, therefore it's called Naomi's child. Because when you raise the child, you become automatically like the mother. And then you see it even further. Rabbi Yochanan said, you see it from here. V'ishta Yehudis Yalda es Yared Avigdar. That the Torah tells us that the Tanakh tells you that Yared, which is another name for Kalev, married the daughter of Parai. Remember Basia Bas Parai. And together, Basia had this Avigdar. Avigdar is another name for Moshe Rabbeinu. So Mered is another name for Kalev because he rebelled against the plan of the spies. But the Torah tells us that Basia is the mother of Moshe Rabbeinu. It wasn't Yechaved the mother of Moshe Rabbeinu. Basia, the daughter of Pari, raised Moshe. She wasn't the biological mother. That's why it's called Basia's child. Rabbi Lazar says from here, and this is, we are all considered the offspring of Yaakov, which is our father, and we're all considered the offspring of Yosef, even if you don't come from his Shevet. Yosef is the father of the Jewish people. Yaakov is the father of the Jewish people. Elo, because Yaakov was the father of the Jewish people. The Yosef Kilka, but Yosef was the one that provided support during the famine in Mitzrayim. That's why we're all called the sons of Yaakov and Yosef. Amar Rab Shmuel bar Nechemi, Amar Rab Yonason. Rab Yonason said, "Kol Amlamed ben Chaver Torah is someone and teaches his friends, his son of his friend Torah. Very often, it's very hard for a father to learn with his own child because sometimes the personalities don't clash. So if you take your friend's son and you sit down and learn with him, what's wrong with that? The Torah considers it as if you're the father of the child. You don't see that so much now. Shnei Avela told us our Moshe. These are the kids of our Moshe. Ve'ela Shmois b'nei Aaron, and it calls it actually the Aaron was the father of these kids. It teaches you Aaron Yolad. Aaron was the father, but he couldn't learn with his children. So Moshe, the uncle, Limad, he was teaching the children Torah of Aaron. Lefichach Nikra Shmoi. That's why they're called the sons of Moshe Rabbeinu. L'chein, there's another pasuk there in Yeshaya. L'chein koyim Hashem es beis Yaakov ashepada es Avraham. So Avraham was redeemed by Yaakov. Where did we find in the Chumash that Yaakov got Avram out of trouble? So that's what the pasuk seems to apply. Amar Yehuda shepadoi mitzar gidel bonim. Avram Avinu was supposed to have a lot of children. He only had two, maybe one. So really, the Torah tells us, Hashem said, I'm going to make your family a large family. But Avram didn't have much to do because he only had one child. So Yaakov, who had a lot of children, redeemed his grandfather. You don't. Yaakov doesn't have to be embarrassed of his father Yitzchak or have his face turn colors from his grandfather. Yaakov did a big job by raising the 12 tribes. Then the Gemara says like this, a very interesting thing. Remember, Shaul HaMelech, actually, David HaMelech gave Kedushin to Shaul HaMelech's daughter, and it was a real marriage. Nevertheless, Shaul in a rage and in somewhat insanity, took his daughter and gave it to a person, Palti. And Palti had to sleep with Shaul HaMelech's daughter in order to show that her father wanted him to show that David is not the husband. So, but Palti had to stay with this lady for many years. So, Ksiv Palti. Sometimes the Tanakh calls him Palti. Uksiv Palti El. He's the Palti El. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Palti Shmoi. V'lam nikra Shmoi Palti El. Sheplote El min Averim. God helped him and saved him from the big Avera. In other words, it was impossible humanly to not to sin and not to have relations with Michal. So, because every night you're with this woman, and she's a beautiful woman, and the king wants you to sleep with this woman, but in your heart's heart, you're concerned that maybe she's in Eishes Ish with David. So, Ma'asu, how did Palti save himself from not having relations with Michal? Noatz Chever. First, he did something. He made a sign for himself. He stuck a sword in the ground, between him and her. Amar, he said, he put whoever is going to try to initiate relations between us should be stabbed by this sword. Now, finally, at the end of the story in Tanakh, this woman, Michal, ended up going back to David and became his wife. And who escorted her to David? Palti. The pasuk says, "Vayelech ita isha." Her husband escorted her back to David. Why does we call Palti the husband of Michal when she wasn't really the husband? They never slept with each other. And says the Gemara, not everything is relations to be a husband. Shenasala ki isha. He was like a husband to her. In other words, he didn't totally ignore her. He built her up and showed her some sort of affection, but he never slept with her. Says the Gemara, the pasuk says, he was crying as he gave up his wife to David. Why was he crying? It wasn't his wife. He was crying because this mitzvah is no more. Because now he can't hold himself back from doing relations. When you hold yourself back from an avera, that's a mitzvah. And now this mitzvah of holding himself back doesn't exist because he returned his wife. He returned his Michal back to her rightful husband. Ad Bachurim, he walked her to Bachurim. Shenasa Shneim ke Bachurim shloi tam tam bira. It's interesting. The Chumash, the Tanakh tells you that because they had abstinence from each other, they both were very youthful. They became like young bachurim, young people, even though they may not have been young, but because of the abstinence, they didn't have relations. They became like young people because they didn't have relations. Amar Rabbi Yochanan tells you, Takva shel Yosef avinusasa shel Boyas, Takva shel Boyas avinasai shel Palti Belayas. What Rabbi Yochanan is saying, that the biggest challenge in Tanakh, as far as holding back from having sexual relations with a lady, was Palti Belayish, not Yosef. Yosef pales in comparison to Boyas, and Boyas pales in comparison to Palti Belayish. You see, Yosef never was in bed with the Ashes Potiphar, right? He just ran out. But Boaz was in bed with a young lady. And not only that, Boaz found himself, and he got so frightened by Yilafes, Amarav, Rav says, he had an erection, basically. And despite despite his Yetzer bothering him, he did not have relations with Rus. But we go to Yichaf Amar Aleph. But what Boaz did pales in Palti ben Layesh, Kedam, like we explained, because Boaz had to only abstain from one night. Palti had to do this for many, many years. And the king wanted him to sleep with the lady, and he didn't. Rabbi Yochanan said, what's the pshat in this pasuk? Rabbi Spana Asuchay Vata Lisa Kunana. There's many women, but you're the best. Rabbi Spana Asuchay Ze Yosef Boaz. Yosef and Boaz are considered great people, MVPs. But there's one on top of them. At Elisa Kulana Zel Palti Balayish. That's Palti Balayish, who's considered to be whose test paled and he succeeded was greater than Yosef and Boaz. Amar Shmuel bar Nachman Rabbi Yonasan. My nixif sheker chen ve'avad Yofi. Sheker chen ze Yosef. Yosef is the false vanity is falsehood. The hevel Yofi, and beauty is like hevel, nonsense. Ze Boaz. Yiras Hashem hitasal. Zel Palti ben Layish. Palti ben Layish showed more Yiras Shemayim when you compare them to Yosef and Boaz. Davarach, another way to learn pshat. Sheker chen ze Darish Moshe. When we find that people learn Torah in the generation of Moshe, the Jewish people were learning Torah. In the generation of Yeshua, the Jews continued to learn Torah. But Yiras Hashem Hitasalu Zadar Shachizkiyo. The best generation where we find Jewish people, and all the Jews were very, very learned, was in the generation of Chizkiyo, King Chizkiyo. Because he made sure that every Jew, basically was a very learned person. And that was only to be mechaper on the averis that his father did with Avodah Zarah. Davar achar, another pshat, sheker chen zer darish shel Moshe, v'Yeshua, v'hevel yofi der darish shel Chizkiyahu, Yiras Hashem, hitas halo. There was one generation where they learned better than the generation of Chizkiyahu. And what is that? Zer darish Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi. That's the generation of Yehuda bar Eloi. Amr all of Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi, that it wasn't the quality of how much they learned, it was the sacrifice that people did in his time to learn Torah. Because everybody was so poor that everyone did not have a set of clothing. So how did they learn Torah? There were 6 students, miskasim betalas echad, would lie under one cover, naked, and they would cover themselves and learn Torah. So despite the poverty and deprivation, they still sacrificed to learn Torah. So that was the greatest generation when it came to sacrifice of learning Torah, in the generation of Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi. Now the Mishnah continues regarding a king. If let's say the king lost a family member, and we learned the Kohen Gadol follows the funeral, right? But the Mishnah says that a king, for his honor, should not leave the palace. He doesn't go follow coffins, funeral processions, even if it's a relative of his. Rabbi Yehuda says, if he wants, he could go follow the funeral processions. Because you find in Tanakh, David HaMelech went to the funeral of Avner, a general. The King David was following the coffin. So the answer to Rabbi Yehuda, that's you can't bring a proof from David HaMelech. That was one exception where David HaMelech went to a funeral because he had to prove a point that he was not involved in hiring a hitman to kill Avner. Yoav David HaMelech's general went on his own and took out Avner because he felt that Avner rebelled against David, but for other reasons, and he used that as an excuse to kill him. So David had to prove to the people that he's so sad that Avner died that he's going to the funeral. And so don't accuse me, he was saying, don't accuse me, David, that I was involved in hiring a hitman to kill Avner. This was to appease the people. So therefore, that's the exception. But generally, a king should not go out to a funeral. When they feed the king, who's an aval, the first meal after the funeral of somebody that he has to sit shiva, everybody should be sitting on the floor. He should be sitting al hadargosh on this piece of furniture called a dargash. We're going to see what that means, what this furniture called dargash is. The rabbis taught, where do women in a funeral procession that they're walking the coffin, where do women go? Do women go before the coffin or behind the coffin? If they go before the coffin, then the men are on the back and the men are staring at the women as they walk. But since it's a levaya, we're not going to worry about illicit, immoral thoughts. But generally, they should go in the back. So the rabbi said, if the meaning of the place is that women should always walk behind the coffin, they should walk behind the coffin. If their custom is that they should walk in front of the coffin, they should go in front of the coffin. And women, when they walk in front of a coffin, the benefit is they probably cry more. It brings about more sadness. Rabbi Huda says, Rabbi Huda says a woman should always walk in front of the coffin. So we see that King David was always in the back of the coffin, so it must be that the women were in the front of the coffin. So Rabbi Huda's opinion is that women always should be in front of the coffin. That was Rabbi Huda's opinion. So they told Rabbi Huda, really, David HaMelech walked in front and in the back of the coffin, because he wanted to, mingle amongst the crowd to show everybody that he's really sad and that he wasn't involved in the murder of Avner. He went from the women to the men, to the men to the women. Everybody knew that the king was not involved in killing Avner ben Ner. So that was the point of having David walk around. So, but you can't bring a raya that the women should always walk in front of the coffin. Darash Rava made a speech. Ma'id what's the pshat in the pasuk? Vayave kolam lahavri, says David. The people came to give David HaMelech the first meal for sitting shiva after Avner. Ksiv lahachreis. They wanted to kill him. In the beginning, people wanted to cut David HaMelech down because they accused him that he hired a hitman to kill Avner. And the end, they gave him food like a regular oval. Why did Avner get killed? Because the answer is he was a chief general for Shaul HaMelech. Okay, he was a very big tzaddik. But when Shaul HaMelech thought, as you remember in Tanakh, that David HaMelech was hiding out in the city called Nov, which was a city of Kahanim, and in a rage, an insane rage, David HaMelech took revenge against the whole city of Nov and killed out all the Kahanim. And Avner was his chief general. And he could have protested against Shaul for doing such a crazy thing, and he didn't protest, therefore he himself got murdered. Rabbi Yitzchak said, not true. Micha, he did protest, and he couldn't get Shaul HaMelech to change his mind. They both had their source of their opinion, whether Avner did protest or did not protest. They sourced it from one pasuk. The pasuk says, because it says, the king mourned over the loss of Avner. And he said, the king David, he said, how could Avner die? Was he in chains? Was his feet locked up? So what does that mean? What was David saying? David was wondering, he did not protest. Hachikama, this was David was giving a reason why Avner was killed. You were not in chains. Your hand wasn't handcuffed. So why didn't my time mechisa? Why didn't you protest? So at the Levaya, David HaMelech was giving a hesped, justifying the death of Avner because he could have protested, an honest hesped. But kinfal of neva avlo nefalta. That's why you died like somebody who did corruption. But there's another opinion that he did protest and he didn't, and Shaul HaMelech did not, was not moved by it. Itmoy hu mitama. Really, David HaMelech was giving his eulogy in a question form. Hakamois novel yamas. Why should you die such in a disgusting manner? Your hands were not in handcuffs. Your feet was not in chains. And so, in other words, you did protest. My tama can fall of avlo nefalta. Then why? I can't figure out. David HaMelech was saying why God would take you in such a manner. Why would you be killed in such an ugly manner by being stabbed to death? So, Laman de Alma Micha, according to the opinion that David HaMelech, that Avner did protest against Shaul for killing out Noivira Kahanim, my tami anished. And why did God punish Avner? He delayed coronating David to be the king after the death of Shaul HaMelech. When Shaul was killed, Avner, who was the loyal general of Shaul, crowned Shaul HaMelech's son, Mephibosheth. And there was a split. Not everybody accepted David HaMelech as being the heir to Shaul's throne. Avner thought that Shaul had a son, he should be the king. And so there was a split until everybody finally accepted David as the king. So because he caused that delay, people did not take David seriously when Shaul was killed. Therefore, he himself was killed. That's the Mishnah says, my dargish. What does it mean that the king sits on this piece of furniture called a dargish? It's a type of furniture, type of bed that you could sit on, but it's meant for mazel. People don't normally sit on that. That's what Ula said. It's like a very neat bed. It's there for nothing, to bring the mazel of parnasa into the house. When he sees a clean house, it brings mazel. Amalei Rabbanan le'ula. So Rabbanan said to Ila, so what are you making the king sit on that when he's an oval? Mi'i kamidi, the adi idin lo yisvin v'hashtem asvin alai. We have a piece of furniture that no one sits on, and now all of a sudden the king is an oval. He's going to sit on that piece of furniture. Call Misaskin, let them bring the chairs. Why is he sitting on this fancy bed? And says the Gemara, Maskef lo Rava, my kusha. What kind of question is that? Dilma midi da havachila v'shtia. Like any food and drink, when a person becomes oval. Till now, he doesn't need anybody to bring him food. Hashta, but now he's an oval. The king's an oval. People are bringing him food. So everything is a little bit funny when he's a oval, and therefore he sits on a piece of furniture, on a piece of bed, that's how they used to actually sit on when they ate. On a bed that normally is not used for sleeping and for eating. El ikash, if you want to ask a question to Ula, hakasha, this is the question you should ask Ula. Dargish ain't it el we have a brisa that says, we know in those times, that we learned this in Ma'id Katan, that they used to turn over all the beds when a person became an oval. Okay, there's a special reason for that. But this dargish is a type of bed, since it's not used, you don't have to turn it over. You can keep it straight. You keep it straight up. Hang it straight against the wall. If it's a bed that is for mazel, why don't you have to turn it over? It looks like a bed. It's shaped like a regular bed. Vatanya, we learned in the Brisa, when you turn over beds, when a person becomes le'aleinu aval, he should turn over every bed. So why does this dargish, if you're calling it a bed, why don't you have to turn it over when a person becomes an aval? So the Gemara says, "My question, what kind of question is that?" There's certain types of bed that look like a bed, but you don't sit on it. You put vessels, you put your dishware on it. So those types of bed don't have to be turned over. So this dargish doesn't have to be turned over. So, but it could still mean a dargish it looks like a bed, but it's a mazel bed. Nobody sits there. This is your question. A dargish, you loosen the straps. I'm going to give you the picture right now, in a second. Right now, here's the picture. Here's the picture. So this is how it looks. This bed. We may have seen these pictures when we learned Ma'at cotton. So there's the straps are connected to the bars around it. Okay, and then we're going to learn that sometimes you wrap it around the bars, like you see in picture number 2. Okay, and then we're going to learn that you straighten it up when you can't. Well, okay, we'll learn that in a second. So anyway, Ella, if it's a bed made of for mazel, does it have any straps? Why should it have any straps to be able to loosen it? It should always be fixed into the sides of the posts. But when you have a strap, that means you could remove it, maybe to wash it. So it must be the Arsa Darga is a certain type of bed. It's a type of bed, almost like a hammock, where it's tied to the posts. So again, maybe it's used for a nap, but not for eating or something like that. But it's unusual that the king will sit there. Dargush, we go to Amud Beis, Seruga mitoichem, mita seruga me'algaba. Like I showed you in the picture, a dargush has the strings along the posts right here. A regular bed has the wrapping around the posts, around the side posts. So, Meisvei, if that's the question, the Gemara asks, Meisvei kli'es me'emasai, mekablim tumah, Hamita Barisa Mishifim Baradag, Vimita Musuregas, Mialgaba, Lomeli Shifis Aradag. The Mishnah says, what is the final job in order to make a bed a final product? So when you slide, you rub it down with the skin of a fish to make it smooth and nice and shiny. But what if it doesn't have posts all around it, right? Why would I need to rub it down? It's anyway covered. The sides are covered. So why would I need to rub it down? It's anyway going to be covered by the leather. Both a bita and a dargush is the type of where the straps are not covering the outer poles. The difference is minor. They both look like this, but some of them are connected to the wall via loops, as you can see over here. Some actually have their own straps that make their own loops, but then there's not a separate loop. So that's the difference between the dargish. But they both look like that picture over there. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, halacha Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. The halacha is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, that for a dargish you have to let you have to be mekayim the mitzvah of kfiyas amita by loosening the straps. The thing is going to fall to the floor. This leather is going to fall to the floor. It's only going to get dirty on the underside, but not on the top. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that's the way to do it. But the Chachamim say no, you stand it up. You don't want to get the leather at all dirty. You're going to cause it. You're going to cause damage. Amar Rabbi Yaakov. Even everybody would agree if the bed looked like this, where it has two posts. You see the small the legs of the bed, two posts. It's impossible to turn it over. So you just stand it up on its side, and that's called zoikif, the big bita, straightening the bed when a person's novel. Again, we don't do these things because it's one of those things that got lost because people, the goyim used to make fun of the Jews when they turned over the bed when somebody became a novel. Another 2 minutes and we'll stop. He can force the Jews to go to a war, a permissible war, but he has to get permission from the Sanhedrin. He can make a pathway through somebody else's property. And let's say the king has a piece of field, and in order to get to his field, he has to walk through your property. He can make himself a special pathway, an easement, and you can't protest. And derech hamelech ein lashir, and he can make it a width at any size. If normal size highway is 16 amas, he can make his pathway 20 amas, and you can't protest. Now, when they go to war, all the spoils of war are given first to the king. He takes his half, and the other half are shared with the people. Tanya Tonina Chadazima, we learned it one time. Even though in last Mishnah we already discussed this idea that to go to war you need to ask the 71 Sanhedrin. So why does the Mishnah repeat it over here again? So since we're now talking about all the laws of the Melech, so we repeat this idea true. And it's true that you could have learned it from a previous Mishnah, but sometimes the Mishnah repeats itself. Rabbi Yehuda Mashmuel. Rabbi Yehuda says on Mashmuel, okay, we'll stop in 1 minute. Rabbi Yehuda Mashmuel says, when the Jews in Tanakh came to Shmuel and asked him for a king, he started giving them, you're asking for a king, he can take your daughters and make them work very hard. He can take your boys and draft them into the army and do hard work. He can take your money away. So he gave them a whole litany, almost like what a tyrant can do. So that's what Shmuel told the people. So the question was always, did the Jewish people, when they came to Shmuel and said, please make us a king, did they do a good thing? So we're going to learn that it's a machlokes. Shmuel says, Kol Omer Pashas Melech Mutaboy. Anything that Shmuel Hanavi said that the king could do, like a tyrant, that's really should be taken literally in Tanakh. So he can really enforce, like a very strong dictator. But Rav says, Shmuel Melech was being exaggerating. He wanted them to be afraid. You're going to take a king, you're going to have fear for him. He's not your buddy. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yehuda said that the whole point of this Shmuel saying all these things about the king was only so that the people should have fear for the king, but it's not to be taken literally. Rabbi Yehuda says that the Jews did correctly for asking for a king. Gimel mitzvahs and Yisrael 3 mitzvahs the Jewish people were commanded to do when they get into Eretz Yisrael. Lahamad lehem melech, to establish a king. So the Jews did a good idea, but asking Shmuel, we need a king. Lahachazar shel Amalek, to get rid of Amalek. Livnois lehem beis HaBechira, and to build the base of Migdash. Rab Narai says, look, they were not doing a bad thing from asking for a king. Maybe they were, but it's because they were complaining that it's so hard to be without a king. So Shmuel started making all this noise about what it means to have a king. So it's not clear if it should be taken literally or not, but this is the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Okay, we're going to continue with Tanya tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem. It's a long daf, but